Your doctor checks your cholesterol. Your doctor checks your blood pressure. If both numbers look acceptable, most appointments end there. You walk out with a handshake and a follow-up scheduled for next year. And here's what nobody tells you on the way out the door. Neither of those numbers measures whether your arteries are actually flexible. There's a third measurement, one that predicts cardiovascular risk independently of cholesterol, independently of blood pressure, and it almost never comes up in a standard office visit. It's called arterial stiffness, and it's been hidden in plain sight in a diet most people already know the name of, but nobody has explained the mechanism. It's called arterial stiffness. I want to start with a scene that I think a lot of people in this audience will recognize. A man, 64 years old, retired, healthy weight, non-smoker, goes to his annual cardiology check. His LDL is within range. His blood pressure reads 124/78. His doctor shakes his hand and says, "See you next year." He walks out relieved, maybe even a little proud of himself. What nobody measured that morning, what nobody ordered a test for, what nobody mentioned in the 15-minute window between check-in and handshake was whether his arterial walls were still elastic, whether the vessels his heart was pushing blood through every second of every day were absorbing that pressure the way they should, or whether they had stiffened over years of use in a way that no cholesterol panel and no blood pressure cuff was designed to detect. He doesn't know that test exists, neither does most of his family, and his doctor didn't bring it up, not because it doesn't matter, but because the appointment wasn't structured around it. That's the gap. That's what we're talking about today. And 16 studies, a systematic review published in Nutrients in March 2025, covering 13,680 participants across Europe, America, and Australia, found something that I think every adult over 60 needs to hear. The people who closely followed a Mediterranean-style eating pattern had measurably less stiff arteries than those who didn't. Not marginally less stiff, consistently and statistically significantly less stiff.
My name is James Reyes.
I'm an independent health researcher. I read the primary literature so you don't have to. And before we go further, none of this is medical advice. If your blood pressure is dangerously elevated or your cardiologist has given you a specific plan, stay on that plan. This is information to bring to your next appointment, not a reason to change anything alone. That said, my father followed standard recommendations for years. He watched his sodium, he took his medications, he walked. He still had multiple strokes. And the question I couldn't stop asking, the question that launched what became years of reading clinical literature every week, was simple. What were we missing? I'm not telling you the Mediterranean diet is the answer my father needed. I can't say that. What I can tell you is that the research connecting what you eat to the flexibility of your arterial walls is stronger than most people realize, and most doctors don't have 15 minutes to explain it. That gap is why I do this. When was the last time your doctor mentioned the words arterial stiffness? Not blood pressure, not cholesterol, but the actual mechanical flexibility of your arterial walls. I want you to hold that question while we go through this. Now, here's what I want to show you today. There are 3 specific components of a Mediterranean eating pattern that the research links to arterial flexibility through distinct biological mechanisms, not the same mechanism, 3 different ones. And the third one, I'll be honest, surprised me because it involves a food that most people over 60 have been quietly avoiding for 20 years based on advice that the current evidence does not support. Stay with me. Tell me your age in the comments, just the number. I'll explain why in a moment. Let me start with what the research actually measures when it talks about arterial stiffness, because if you've never heard this term outside this video, you're not alone, and that's part of the problem. The standard measure is called pulse wave velocity, PWV. It measures how fast a pressure wave travels through your arterial system when your heart beats. Think of it this way. A young, elastic artery absorbs that wave. It expands and snaps back like a brand new garden hose. A stiff artery can't absorb it. The wave moves faster, arrives at your organs harder, and forces your heart to work against more resistance with every single beat. Fast PWV is bad. It predicts cardiovascular events, heart attack, stroke, independently of your cholesterol, independently of your blood pressure reading. And the systematic review I mentioned, Zupo and colleagues, Nutrients 2025, 13,680 participants used PWV as one of its primary outcome measures, as well as the augmentation index, as well as the cardiovascular ankle vascular index, 3 different ways of measuring the same thing. All 3 showed an inverse relationship with Mediterranean diet adherence. The higher the adherence, the lower the stiffness. Now, and this is the part most people skip, what is actually causing that? Because eat more vegetables is not a mechanism. Mechanisms matter because mechanisms tell you what to prioritize. The first mechanism is olive oil, specifically extra virgin olive oil with high polyphenol content. I want to stop here for a second because this isn't a story about olive oil being good for you. You've heard that. This is a story about the specific biochemistry and why most of the olive oil in your kitchen right now may not be doing what you think. Extra virgin olive oil contains compounds called polyphenols, particularly hydroxytyrosol and oleocanthal. These compounds increase the bioavailability of nitric oxide in your arterial walls. Nitric oxide is a signaling molecule that causes smooth muscle cells in your arteries to relax. When they relax, the vessel dilates. When it dilates regularly, the arterial wall maintains elasticity over time. Here's the catch. The polyphenol content of extra virgin olive oil varies enormously, up to 30 times between brands. An olive oil labeled extra virgin at your supermarket might contain 60 milligrams of polyphenols per kilogram. A high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil starts at 250 milligrams per kilogram. Some exceed 400. The European Food Safety Authority has an official health claim for olive oil polyphenols, but it requires a minimum of 5 milligrams of hydroxytyrosol per 20 grams of oil to make that claim. That is not a threshold most supermarket olive oils reach. A 2025 RCT published in Nutrients, Korek and colleagues, hyperlipidemic patients, high phenolic versus low phenolic EVO, found significant improvements in endothelial function, with reductions in diastolic blood pressure and heart rate in the high phenolic group. The low phenolic group got the same category of oil, different biological result. So when your doctor says use olive oil, they're giving you correct advice. Incomplete advice. Have you ever looked at the polyphenol content on the label of the olive oil you're using, or did you assume extra virgin was enough? I'm genuinely asking because most people don't know this distinction exists. I keep coming back to something a cardiologist said at a conference I was reading a transcript of last year. He described lifestyle advice as, and I want to get this right, precision-free. The category is correct, the dose is absent. That's the gap. Now, before I get to the second mechanism, which involves a completely different pathway and a food your grandmother probably cooked with far more than you do now, I want to tell you about someone. She was 67 years old. She had been using olive oil for 15 years because her doctor recommended the Mediterranean diet after her first high blood pressure reading. She switched from butter. She felt good about that choice. What nobody had told her was that the olive oil she was buying, a well-known Italian brand, respectable label, green bottle, contained 74 milligrams of polyphenols per kilogram. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was doing the category correctly. She just didn't know the category had a dose. Stay with me, because the second mechanism involves something that moves through your blood before it even becomes a nutrient, and the research behind it may be the most counterintuitive finding I've come across in 2 years of reading this literature. Write this down. Dietary nitrate. You probably think of nitrate as something to avoid, processed meat, preservatives, the thing that makes hot dogs vaguely concerning. That's the synthetic version. The naturally occurring nitrate in vegetables, particularly beets, arugula, spinach, and leafy greens, works through an entirely different pathway, and the research on what it does to arterial stiffness is frankly more robust than most people realize. Here's the mechanism. When you eat dietary nitrate-rich vegetables, bacteria in your saliva convert dietary nitrate to nitrite. Your body then converts nitrite to nitric oxide, the same signaling molecule I described with olive oil polyphenols, but arriving through a completely separate pathway. This means the two mechanisms can stack.
You are not choosing between olive oil and beets. You are choosing how many nitric oxide pathways you're activating simultaneously. An umbrella review and meta-analysis published in the Journal of Functional Foods in 2024, Noorozadeh and colleagues, 113 studies, 2,013 participants, found that dietary nitrate supplementation reduced pulse wave velocity, reduced the augmentation index, and increased flow-mediated dilation. That's 3 separate markers of vascular health, all moving in the right direction. The effect became more pronounced with increased study duration and with increased nitrate dose. Now, here's the counterintuitive part, and this is the one I mentioned at the beginning. Most of the adults in these studies who saw arterial benefits were consuming concentrated beetroot juice. The doses that produced endothelial improvement started at 400 milligrams of nitrate. The doses that moved aortic systolic blood pressure started at 800 milligrams. Let me put that in food terms. A small glass of concentrated beetroot juice, roughly 70 milliliters, delivers approximately 400 milligrams of nitrate. Raw beets, arugula, spinach, Swiss chard, these are among the most concentrated natural sources. Here's the myth that the evidence challenges. Most adults over 60 have been told to reduce their vegetable intake at some point because of medication interactions, kidney concerns, or simply because nobody encouraged them otherwise. For the vast majority of adults, and please confirm with your physician if you're on medication that interacts with nitrate, the evidence suggests that the direction is exactly backward. The question isn't, should I reduce these foods? The question is, why wasn't I eating more of them already? Before today, did you associate beets and leafy greens with your cardiovascular health, or were they just healthy vegetables without a specific mechanism attached? Tell me in the comments. And look, I want to be careful here, because let me say this precisely because it matters. The mechanism I just described requires your oral bacteria to do the conversion. If you use antibacterial mouthwash immediately before eating nitrate-rich foods, you eliminate the bacteria that make this work. The research on this is clear and largely unknown. Here's what that looks like in real life. You wake up, use your antibacterial mouthwash, the kind that kills 99.9% of bacteria, which is exactly what the label promises, and then 30 minutes later, you have a salad with arugula and beets. In that window, you have eliminated the primary microbial pathway that converts the nitrate in those vegetables into nitric oxide. The food arrives, the bacteria are gone. The mechanism doesn't fire. This is not a minor footnote. This is a fundamental interaction between a hygiene product most people use without thinking about and a cardiovascular mechanism most people have never been told exists. Standard fluoride toothpaste leaves the oral microbiome intact. Antiseptic rinse does not. The practical sequencing matters too. If you're using both high-polyphenol olive oil and dietary nitrate-rich vegetables in the same meal, a salad dressed with EVO and topped with arugula and beets, for example, you are activating 2 separate nitric oxide pathways simultaneously. The polyphenol pathway through hydroxyutilol, the dietary nitrate pathway through oral bacteria. The research does not yet have a definitive study on their combined effect, but the mechanistic logic suggests they are not competing. They are additive. This is the kind of information that doesn't make it into a 15-minute office visit.
Not because your doctor doesn't care, because the appointment is about your blood pressure number, not the 3 biological pathways that may be influencing it. Before I get to the third component, the one that closes the loop on what I promised at the start, I want to show you how these mechanisms interact, because understanding the sequence changes how you structure your day. Here's what I want you to understand before we move forward. This channel exists because I've been in 2 situations where the information I needed was sitting in a medical database, clear, peer-reviewed, available, and nobody translated it into something I could use in time. My father's strokes, my own appendix. What I learned from both of those is that being informed is not a luxury. It is not extra credit. It is the difference between being a passenger in decisions made about your body and an active participant in them. You are not a passive recipient of medical decisions. You are an informed participant in your own health. And here's what that looks like in practice, starting this week. Step 1.
Extra virgin olive oil, specifically high-polyphenol, 20 to 30 grams per day. That's roughly 1.5 to 2 tablespoons. Look for oils that list polyphenol content on the label, minimum 250 milligrams per kilogram. If the label doesn't list it, call the company or look it up online. This is information you're entitled to. A practical note: heat degrades polyphenols. Use high-polyphenol EVOO as a finishing oil on salads, on cooked vegetables after they come off the heat, on whole grain bread. Reserve lower quality oil for cooking at high temperature. Step 2. Nitrate-rich vegetables at least once per day. Beets, arugula, spinach, Swiss chard, rocket, kale. The dose that matters in the research starts at roughly 400 milligrams of nitrate, which a small serving of concentrated beet juice or a generous portion of raw arugula can deliver. Critical note: do not use antibacterial mouthwash before eating these foods. The oral bacteria that convert dietary nitrate to nitrite are part of the mechanism. Standard fluoride toothpaste is fine. Antiseptic rinse eliminates the pathway. Step 3. The third component, and this closes the loop I opened at the beginning, is fatty fish. Specifically, the omega-3 fatty acids EPA and DHA found in sardines, mackerel, herring, and salmon. A meta-analysis of 10 randomized controlled trials found that omega-3 supplementation significantly improved both pulse wave velocity and arterial compliance. The effect in older adults was stronger than in younger adults, which means the people in this audience are the ones who benefit most. The Mediterranean diet is the only major dietary pattern that combines all 3 of these mechanisms routinely: high-polyphenol olive oil, nitrate-rich vegetables, and fatty fish in daily eating, not as supplements, as food. That's not a coincidence. That's why 16 studies consistently found lower arterial stiffness in people who follow it. Of these 3 steps, the olive oil, the nitrate-rich vegetables, or the fatty fish, which one are you furthest from right now? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. When you speak with your physician, and I hope you do, here is the specific question worth raising. I've been reading about dietary nitrate and high-polyphenol olive oil for arterial stiffness. Is there any reason those wouldn't be appropriate given my current medications and cardiovascular profile? That question opens a conversation most appointments never reach. Give it 12 weeks before you evaluate. Arterial compliance changes gradually. It is not going to shift in a weekend, but the research shows it shifts. Let me bring this together. 3 mechanisms, 3 foods, 1 consistent finding across 16 studies and 13,680 people. High-polyphenol extra virgin olive oil activates the nitric oxide pathway through polyphenol absorption.
and the difference between high polyphenol and standard extra virgin olive oil is up to 30 times. Nitrate-rich vegetables activate a second separate nitric oxide pathway through oral bacteria, a mechanism that disappears completely if you use antibacterial mouthwash first. Omega-3 fatty acids from fatty fish improve arterial compliance through anti-inflammatory and membrane fluidity mechanisms, with stronger effects in older adults. None of these require a prescription, none of them are expensive, all of them have randomized controlled trial data behind them. The reason your doctor may not have mentioned all three in one conversation is not that the evidence doesn't exist. It's that clinical appointments are not designed to deliver nutritional biochemistry in 15 minutes. That's why this channel exists. If this gave you something that your last appointment didn't, drop the word "informed" in the comments. I read every one. And it tells me this kind of research translation is worth continuing. I post every week. Always evidence first, always specific to adults 40 and over. If that's what you're looking for, subscribe, hit the bell, and if someone in your life is dealing with cardiovascular risk that won't budge, share this with them. It may be the most useful 20 minutes they spend this week. One more thing, and I mean this. If your numbers are critically elevated, if you're on blood thinners, if you have kidney disease, please work with your physician before changing anything. The 3 steps I described are food, not medication, but food interacts with medication, and your doctor needs to know what you're eating. For the majority of adults over 60 with normal to mildly elevated cardiovascular risk who are already doing the standard things and wondering why it isn't enough, the research has a specific, mechanistic, evidence-backed answer. It's just not on the pamphlet in the waiting room.